Welcome to Dungeon Apes, a D&D podcast hosted by myself, Drew Silva, and Travis Steven.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're talking about character development.
Yes, character development. I believe you were talking about character development and how one starts character and builds into a character, right? That's essentially
Yeah, we'll kind of pick up. This is a retake, by the way.
Yeah.
This is our first episode. We had some audio issues.
Yeah.
Basically, what I see happen when people have played for the first time and they sit down and they draft a character, before coming up with a character concept and idea separate from class, they start with the class and then they build a character.
Right.
And typically they burn out with that character.
Mm-hmm.
They struggle with connecting because the classes in D&D are pretty specific.
Mm-hmm.
Not just in your abilities, but in what that class actually does. Paladins, warlocks, you have binding contracts with celestial beings, or you have these different archetypes that are incredibly important. And if you don't understand those things when you draft your first character and you develop, then all of a sudden you're sitting there playing a character that really doesn't fit your class, and then you're struggling to come into your own, which I think we experienced a lot in our first campaign.
Yeah, in our first campaign, I think no one really had a grasp, myself included, because again, our first campaign was my first dwelling into D&D, period. And I think a lot of that had to do with because we were inexperienced, you're going to always kind of tend to do and act what's more natural for you as a person, I think. And so I think some people acted more so how they envisioned their character rather than how their class of their character would act. Like, for instance, if you're a paladin, they're hyper religious, right? Like, first and foremost, it's about a god or their, the order in which they're supposed to live their life by. And if that's not who you are as a person, it's going to be hard if you're not truly experienced and thinking about, okay, I'm not me, and I'm not like my reactions to this scenario if I'm a character, but how does a paladin react to this scenario, or a cleric, or whatever, as far as like what your ties are to something. And I think with, especially in our first campaign, our inexperience into that made kind of jotting down those important key elements of what a character is quite difficult to do, because we didn't know what your class encompasses and what that means to choose those categories.
Yeah, it's interesting when people play D&D. You are sitting down and pretending to be your character for a prolonged period of time.
Right.
D&D is kind of a perfect little study of narratology, which is essentially narratives and how they're explained. Whether we know it or not, a lot of players find themselves following the monomyth, which is the hero's journey, because that's everything we've read, everything in modern pop culture is the hero's journey, whether it's television shows, whether it's The Lord of the Rings, if you study Frodo Baggins.
Now, you called the hero's journey a what again?
It's a monomyth.
A monomyth.
Yeah.
Which is
essentially the hero's journey. The hero's journey was when Homer and the Odyssey came out. It's basically a system. Character goes through devastation and loss. Character goes through a major defeat. A character finds some sort of mentor. A character finds a redeeming factor, and it's this full cycle of development and a journey. And it creates great stories. Luke Skywalker in Star Wars follows the monomyth, the hero's journey.
Right.
And when people sit down and play D&D and I ask, what are your guys' backstories? What's the first thing we come up with in our backstories? A reason as to why we're looking for redemption.
Right.
So we've started that first path of that trail. And then throughout the session, your friends become your mentors, the other members of your party. And you're going to experience defeats as villains arise. And eventually, if a campaign's played well, you make this full circle.
Right.
And you go away from the campaign. If your character hasn't died, you go away from the campaign saying, man, my character's story, that development, that should have been a book, that should have been a movie, that should have been, it was phenomenal. And that's something that we develop. What's the most key factor in all of that? is the character.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't take the time to build a character and work on the development through role playing and through interactions with the DM saying, hey, you know, this is where I'd like to see my character go, you miss out such a huge facet of the game that's really enjoyable.
Right. And I think inexperienced players like we really didn't think about for our first campaign at all what our characters' backstories truly were, other than like quick sentences. You know, a lot of our characters essentially were born the day we started playing. As far as like, we didn't think about, okay, what are their relations? Who was their mother, their father, their brothers and sisters? Where they come from? Why are they here now? Were they raised? Were they, you know, how far away were they raised? Why are they coming to this new area? A lot of these things didn't necessarily come to fruition when we started our first campaign in comparison to the one we're doing now. Most of us, if not all of us, have very distinct regions we knew we came from. Very distinct relationships, very distinct skill sets, and reasons why we left, and reasons why we are where we are now, which makes becoming your character while you're playing so much easier. And you're able to flex and make decisions in the environment while you're playing with your friends so much easier, because you know more about your character and know more about why they might make a decision. So creating that narrative helps you play much more comfortably, wouldn't you say?
I think it does. I think it allows you to kind of truly be your character when you sit down and you attempt to play as it. The hardest thing with any character is fleshing out the details, the minor details, when you run into instances in the game where your character runs into something and you have to take a step back and be like, does my character like that? Does my character not like that? What sort of process is that? But if you put work into the backstory, you kind of can just refer to those things and be like, oh, this makes sense why my character would not like this or would like this.
Right.
And then you can start the development process once you have the foundation. And that's probably the most fun in D&D, is the development process, because it's truly evolving a character. I'm interested to see what happens next week after some of our characters made some unwise decisions, and kind of what that leads their characters to do in the future.
Right. Yeah, referring back to our Aventary episode that we just had, we had quite the abrupt ending to our session because things kind of spiraled out of control, which is now quite interesting, because I feel like with any D&D campaign, your characters have to have a reason to be together. Whether or not you wrote that into your story when you initially came together, like let's say, oh, we're a group of friends that have been journeying together for years, and then you're like, and this is where we're starting 4 years into this journey with each other. That's one thing. But then when you're like, oh, we're all meeting each other for the first time ever, which I'm sure is common with most starting campaigns. We're meeting, this is us meeting to each other for the first time. But then why do you need to stay together? Because I meet people all the time, and it doesn't mean I'm going to have them at my house, and then now they're working with me, and then I just follow them around while they do their own family functions and stuff, and that doesn't make any sense. But if you're playing in a D&D campaign, you have to have a reason to be around each other. So initially with this campaign, we had our binding thing that brought us together in the story was really just a simple fact that we were all escaping something to this area, and we happened to kind of come as foreigners to this area. So we're like, hey, I don't know anybody, you don't know anybody, cool, let's know each other. But now we have this very real, tangible thing, and it's holding us together in the group, because essentially we're now kicked out of our home. Our very small beginning home that we had, they're like, be gone. So now we were even more so, we came together in this place together as new people, and we're like, okay, let's make this our home. And now we were just all kicked out and made homeless at the same time from this new area as a group. So I think now that makes us bind together even stronger.
It will.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out, to say the least.
So development and creating a reason for characters to be together is the classic DM hook. Like a DM has to find a way to try to hook a group in together,
Right.
and then through role play throughout that group really determines like what they're gonna do. Like, hey, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. I have a game going at Juvenile Hall with some of the residents there, and the hook line for them was "Got to escape from a jail." It's hilarious, and they did. And now they're in a town, doing normal adventure stuff.
Right.
But part of it is creating hooks. But if you guys don't have reasons for your characters to follow these hooks, if that development hasn't been created, then you just spin in circles. The first campaign that we played in, we had so many different people going in different directions that we spun in circles constantly.
Yeah.
And it was constantly trying to get people to come back into the story. And this time, I don't think we're going to run with that issue. And part of it is all the work done beforehand. So if you're new to D&D and you're going to sit down, you're going to play your first game, it's important to get with your DM, and it's important to think about, how do I make my character likable? If everyone just went with the archetype of the smoldering, cool, badass that's sort of in it for himself and just going to do what he wants, you run into, okay, that's great, see ya. How do you fit in with everyone else in the story?
Yeah, I think we did okay with that in our first campaign, considering all of us had new characters. And like anything that you're new into, I think you usually end up falling into whatever the stereotype is. And that would be one of them right there. Like, oh, I don't care, I'm the outcast. I'm just badass, mysterious guy that just like one-shots everything that I look at, And I think we did okay not falling into that. But I can definitely see how that could cause some issues bringing a group together. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need to do, right? In the stories, you want to play together, so you have to have a reason to play together.
Gotta have that apple, that carrot dangling in front that causes the group to go there. One of the things I really enjoyed about the development process that we just went through with our characters was taking the extra time, going one-on-one with the DM, saying, hey, this is what I want to do, and this is how we do it. And if you're going to DM, I encourage you to do that with your players. It takes, ours took a little bit longer, but again, the time we put into...
It's a little excessive.
It's a bit much, but we're also making a production out of it.
Bugs like, hey, I like what you guys say. You mind if I just orbit for a little bit? It's cool.
Holy cow. He was relentless.
He was,
Man.
Anyways.
When you're developing a campaign like that, it doesn't take that much time. But it's great to have that little one-on-one. Characters like, this is what I want to do with my character. Player wants to do it with the character. And it's great. It creates a very fun atmosphere. And this next week, we'll really dive into some of the personal side quests that'll start to pop up.
I noticed in our campaign for Aventuria that you started to kind of like just pepper in a little bit of the side quests, like the beginnings of them. Yeah. And that comes with discussing first with the DM kind of what your goals are for your character. And I think it allows the DM more flexibility too, because you kind of know, like I have a pet with me, so you kind of always know, had we not talked about that, you probably wouldn't have been able to ahead of time pre-plan certain interactions or certain things that might incorporate the fact that I have a pet, or my side story, or why I'm here, what my overall goal as my character is. You'd kind of just be like, okay, well, I guess dungeon skeletons go, because there's no substance to the character outside of that, but having that discussion ahead of time definitely makes it a whole lot more interesting.
What you just said there, that was a key phrase, which is substance of a character.
Yes. So
you have to have substance. What drives your character to be your character? What underlying factors create the development it has? We talked about Stranger Things last episode, so I'll talk about it again this episode, because as far as a story goes, it does such a great job. Hopper, who is one of the protagonists in the story, his character and sort of his demeanor as a father figure was developed in the previous season when you find out his backstory, and he lost his little girl at some point in a car accident.
Right.
And so it creates all this development and this substance in this character. And this entire character, you can see where that devastating event has sort of spawned and how the writing reflects it. It's good writing. In a sense, every time we sit down and play D&D, we're writing.
Right.
We're not physically putting a pen to paper and writing, but we're crafting a story. We're creating a story. And that substance, that what is unique about your character, what have they been through, or what things do they like, or even just different flavors of role-playing with other characters and how they interact with one another, those things create a story that people want to hear and listen to. And it can really captivate an audience and captivate the players you're playing with. And it just adds more creativity to the table. The more substance, the more it grows. It's like a fungus.
Absolutely. And then with that substance and with you yourself and the audience kind of understanding part of what your backstory is, or the details about your character, they themselves can kind of draw their own conclusions before something happens as to what your character might do in this situation, which makes it more exciting. Because, if you know somebody is super frail and weak and skittish and they come up against this huge monstrous thing, you might be like, oh, he's not going to handle this well. Because you know exactly how his personality is going to handle this certain thing. Or, like, my character's deathly afraid of water. So, like, as you're like, and we come across through the thicket, we see that there's a river and across the ways where we need to go. Then you're like, oh, shit, Yo's not going to like that because I can tell right off the bat. I know that he's not going to like the water situation. So how is he going to handle the situation? And that comes with that. Those subtle details kind of allows the audience to have their own foresight into what could happen because of those
Creates a
substance
response.
details. Yeah.
It does. Critical Role, that's probably what makes them the most successful about their campaign. It's not just production, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Or the fact that they're all voice actors.
It doesn't hurt.
No, it doesn't hurt. Those things are part of the reason why they're great. But I think the biggest factor is every single character that comes up to bat in that show has substance, has real substance. And the role playing involved within the people, there's no shame in it. They go and role play it out with these characters. And they flesh out these characters as they play. Right. That's something that I think our second episode of this new campaign, we did a really good job with that. It was impressive. Yeah. It was and if we could get more of that, which we will. Yeah, we will for sure. I think all of us are improving a lot, and the foundation of all of this much more substance to what we're doing versus the other time. Right. We're finding right now our biggest issue is talking over each other because we all feel like our characters can interject with every given situation because everyone's so excited and they feel like they're so much more confident than they were comparatively because they have so much more to know about their character that they're like, because they feel like they can just jump at everything. Out of 7 people at our table, 4 have dominant personalities, as do their characters. And everyone at our table has a dominant personality, but 2 of our experienced players, Logan and Dave, take a huge step back. Dave, especially this campaign, because he wants you guys, people who are newer, to really take up a spot. Right. And it's just not in Trevor to be super up in front. Right now, he's kind of like a low-key hype man. He just comes in and he's like, little comment, and then he goes back to like the substance of whatever's happening. Hey, little comment, and then you're like, just to remind you that he's there. Right. Yeah. That he's still there. And he plays that role well. Yeah. But, our characters, Doothmere, has a big voice. And I don't think it matters what character Garrett plays. Yeah. It's you're going to get the same bang for your buck every time. Yeah. Which is fun. And, surprisingly, the biggest breakout of this new campaign has been Taggart. Oh, yeah, absolutely. He transformed completely. Before, he was literally just a walking stat stick. He was just like, I don't know, attack. Yeah, it's incredible, actually. Probably the most unlikely, in my mind, transformation of play type that we're going to see. And it's really, really cool. And so as our group continues to improve, those things are awesome. but it comes through substance and character development, which we really haven't, from a DM perspective, I really haven't dangled much in front of you guys. It's been a slow building establishment in the world that we're in right now. And I want it to be a slow trickle, and I want role play to happen before the big things start to manifest and before heavier side quests and different things start to form.
And I think you get a lot of reward from that, like taking that time and really in drawing up your character beforehand when you go to play, because you start to develop relationships with other characters that you're playing with that you didn't even expect. Like you're focusing very much so in yourself. You're focusing, okay, what is my character? What do they do? Where do they come from? All these things about your character. And then as you play out your character with those things in mind, you end up making better relationships with some other characters in the campaign because you align better with them, or you're put into scenarios where you're closer with them than you actually didn't even think about as a person beforehand. Like me and Doothmere have become really close because of how our characters interact in a city setting. We like to be outside and outside the outskirts, not within a tavern or within a house, because we were used to being in the mountains and being in the sticks and trees. So we're much more, and plus we have pets, so we're much more comfortable, much more in our element when we're staying outside. So we ended up staying in this little like cliffside just outside town every night. So then we've built this relationship with, oh, hey, we both have pet companions that are very important to our characters, and we're building that relationship from character to character just because of that situation, which I didn't think that would happen at all.
No.
In all actuality, I thought I was going to connect more with Tenebris or Lux because I was supposed to be this more stealthy, kind of laying in the back in the cut, type character. But when it came down to it, especially for combat and stuff, Lux ends up being way in the front because he's faster and way more stealthy. And yes, I'm still on the back, but my interactions with Lux are far, far less than I thought they would have been, which is nothing wrong with that. But that's just literally because we're organically playing out our characters.
Very organic.
In the scenarios that they're put in, how they should be. Like Lux should not be in the middle of a group or melee. His character should be the one looking and scouting ahead because he's quick, agile, stealthy.
Right.
So that's what his character would do. You wouldn't have a barbarian in the back with a little tiny bow and arrow and be like, think, think, laying in the cut with the ability to cut something in half with his great axe while he's missing every single shot with a bow. It just wouldn't make any sense.
It wouldn't.
Right. So I find that because we took the time to do that, we are creating, like, every episode is really exciting to me because I don't know who am I going to connect with next, or what other relationship am I going to build up next, which I didn't even think about building relationships with individual players, as weird as that sounds. I thought we all just would passively build a relationship as players and as our characters together. I didn't really think I would jump essentially one relationship with my character versus another up above the relationships of other characters in the party.
Right.
And that comes just because of the character development. So if you're starting a new character, what would you suggest would be some of the first steps to help get the character development along the way?
Well, I think you think about your goals within the campaign. Just very basic foundation of what you want to achieve. And then sort of think about characters you've enjoyed in shows.
I'm going to stop you right there. What would be some examples of goals you could have as a character in a campaign?
Okay, so you might have, as a player, not a character, as a player.
Yeah. That was the other part of that question.
Yeah, and we'll get to character goals in a second.
Okay.
I think that's a great question too. But player goals is, and that again goes establishing your play group with the DM. But as a player goal, do you want to build a character that starts out with a very dark side and you bring him back to a sort of redeeming quality?
A redemption arc type thing?
Yeah. Or do you want to do the opposite? Do you want to have a character that's sort of searching for a purpose, and you may not know what that purpose is before the game, but you're waiting for that moment to happen in game where you're like, yep, that's it. That's where I want to take this development. Are you combat focused? Do you really want a campaign that's straight into combat, and what kind of archetypes will suit that? Do you want a nice, calm role-play campaign? Those are some of the things that you can choose to do.
Right. I think it's funny that how active and dangerous our campaigns have been, because I didn't think they necessarily wouldn't be, because I know that's what part of it is, that you're going to get some action. But I also didn't think that we would be getting as much action as we are. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, we were at a dance competition and we got kicked out of town for almost murdering people. Yeah,
those are character decisions that aren't always the wisest.
Right, but, but I can see how, like, I can see the comfort in some people doing campaigns where they're like, because not everyday life, even back then, is as sketchy as life could have been back then. Because again, we only can imagine in a theory of like hundreds of years ago type scenario, or
right.
thousands in some case. They didn't always have to be so bloody. We always have this, like, when we're thinking like medieval times esque. We just think that you woke up in the morning and you were lopping someone's head off in the evening. That's just what happened.
Well, we have a couple players that I think are still stuck on that path. But before we digress too far, once you look at shows you enjoy, mm-hmm. look at books you've read, look at comics, whatever it may be, and sort of, hey, I like elements about this character, I like elements about that character. Kind of build those elements into your character.
Oh, okay.
You're trying to play something that you've seen, but you wish those characters would have done this better or would have had these characteristics, mm-hmm. and sort of put those things together.
Thank you.
And then that dynamic creates your first character, right? And then you begin fleshing out the details. Like, it may be as simple as, if my character likes a candy bar, what type would it be?
Yeah.
What's my character's favorite color? Is my character a morning person or a night person?
Yeah. So the basic everyday life things.
Yeah, it was a technique I used to do a lot when I was young, and I was part of this online site, and it had a lot of discussions on roleplay, but then a lot of discussions on writing and character development. And there's this questionnaire I'll never forget, and I still have it saved on my computer. Mm-hmm. There's 100 questions you would never think to ask your character. And that's
amazing.
Yeah, it's essentially, what side of the bed would your character sleep on? Like, if someone flips a coin, does your character call head or tails every time? Or do they flip-flop? All of these questions, these sort of intricate details. And you really find yourself diving into the mind of your character. And what's really fun is pushing your character further and further away from you personally.
Yes.
And creating that. When our players sit down at the table, one of the things we were trying to do was the whole switch shirt thing that lasted for 1 week. But I still thought it was a great idea. Do something that takes you out of Travis and puts you into Yo. Do something that takes you out of Taggart and puts you into Tenebris. And those things, when you sit at the table, if you're fully developed into your character, then you get to start working on relationships with other characters and other finer details, because you don't have to spend so much time focusing in on what you're doing as a character.
Mm-hmm. I lost my train of thought. I do think that, like, asking a lot of those questions is going to help tremendously, because I know that when we were starting this campaign, some of our members came to me and asked, like, help on backstory stuff, and I was like, we'll start with the basic things, like, do you have a mom or dad? I mean, obviously everyone has some sort of creation, but depending upon what you are, who you are, maybe it's different. And if they are part of your life, what are their names? Do you have any siblings? What were you good at? What did you suck at? What if we're like 30 or 40 years old, what did you do for a living? Were you a bum? Do you just live with your mom and do nothing every day? It's not like we were born the day we get the campaign together. You're getting a character, in most cases, fully grown adult. So what did you do? When you woke up in the morning, did you have coffee? Do you drink coffee? Is there coffee in your area? Do you drink something else?
Right.
Did you start work really early in the morning? Like all these things that you would just go through in your everyday life, but then put your character there and be like, okay, if I lived in this region, I did these things, and I'm this kind of, being. Asking those questions. So basically asking questions. Asking questions is a huge component to character development, character building. And you kind of, as you ask them, your answers to that question help you sculpt as you go along for your creation.
They do. And again, it creates that cohesiveness that you truly know your character. Mm-hmm. I have a character in a campaign, and one of the things I do before I play my characters, which is rare, by the way, I rarely get to not DM. Mm-hmm. And in this current campaign that I'm actually enjoying playing, I write a little short story for my character at the start. That's one of the first things I do.
Like a little paragraph or epitaph or something.
No, like a 10 to 15 page short story.
Oh, okay.
Some sort of major little plot line, condensed.
Yeah.
And as I find myself writing it, I can flush out a lot of details of what the peculiars are about that character. Granted, I'm a little more affinitive towards writing.
Right.
It's just something I prefer and I've done for a long time. But even the paragraph, even sitting down and writing just a little bit about your character would help. It would. And that's when you get to start to create one of the questions you asked earlier, which was character goals. What are your character goals? And that can be really fun. It could be something as simple as my character's goal is to redeem the name of my family because, someone stole the national treasure and whatever it may be. You could use something like, the goal of my character is to avenge. Avenge is kind of a popular isotrope. And then there's some nice tropes that are not super specific, but it's simple as, I'm on a quest to find the world's most beautiful flower.
Which could be anything. Yeah. It's super broad.
I played a game where that was someone's character's goal. Her character's goal was to find the most beautiful thing in the world, and that was her whole campaign. That's what drove her forward. So, and it was actually a very interesting sort of archetype.
So if I'm breaking this down further, now we're starting to get some building blocks on character development. So one, asking questions is a good way to build your character. Two, another method would be writing a short story that you either have answered those questions in, or you use that short story to be your questionnaire answers. Three, come up with a personal goal, you as a person playing in this campaign or as this character, and a character goal itself in the campaign. Which I think that I remember when you first asked me that question, what are your goals for this? I didn't think at all about my own personal goals for the campaign. I thought that was only a character question you can ask. So it's very interesting that I was like, oh wow, you're right. You are going to have individual goals on top of your character goals,
right? As
to what you're going to want to get out of your campaign. So those three things right there are already huge building blocks for developing a character.
Correct. They are. Now, I'll use an example to kind of tie those blocks into something actual, tangible. Take a character named Thorn.
Okay.
This is a character I've had. So my player goal when I came in, I wanted a character who was chaotic good, because that's an alignment that I've always sort of been drawn to. Someone who is truly chaotic good, as in does whatever he deems necessary for the end goal that he thinks is right. So I created a character who's a little brutish, but also kind of has a humorous side to him. One of my favorite characters from the Marvel series is Thor. So it was kind of a play on that sort of personality, mixed with a huge redemption arc. See, the pretense of this campaign was you were a noble from a family, and that family had all the noble families had been wiped out. You were put in a stasis. You woke up 200 years later. No one knew who you were.
The Avatar arc.
No one cared about you, pretty much.
That's cool.
And you're on what appears to be a quest to save people from something they don't even know exists because it's been gone for so long. So this character was kind of like the redheaded stepchild of his family. He's, the oldest son, but he's a black sheep. He likes to partake in violence and raiding, and he thinks ruling a people and ruling a nation through brute strength is the right way to do it. And it's kind of outcasted him from the tenderness and careness of his parents. And so now he's in a world where that brute strength doesn't work at all because he doesn't have that. And so now he has to realize and make these changes, and the development's really, really hard. So out of those foundation blocks, I have goals for me, I have goals for my character, and I have the basic types of what my character does. And all the building blocks past that are done in-game through role-playing and through decision-making. And as things happen, let those things actually affect your player. If you're involved in a crazy altercation, right? And it's so easy in the world of fantasy to have your character be involved in this bone-shaking altercation. You get knocked down, you got to be rezzed, whatever it may be. And we get off, and our character's like, sweet, all right, next one.
Like, I just saw a whole village of children get murdered. I'm still normal and fine. This
Exactly.
is okay for me.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
I challenge players to react differently. And sometimes it throws a wrench at your DM.
Right.
So, but if you're a confident DM, you'll embrace this sort of development. But, Fjorn goes through a case where he fires a bow. He mishits a target and kills his friend,
Crit
another
1,
player character.
Crit 20.
Yeah, a natural 1 into a natural 20.
Yeah.
And now his whole development's changed.
Mm-hmm.
His whole go forward and everything and be brute and be rule with strength, that's in
It weakened him mentally.
He can't do that now because look what it got him.
Right.
Look what it's done to him. So now he's too frail. So now he has to start the arc of building back up.
Yeah.
Within reason. And it's just development, and it's a nice little rinse and repeat cycle that everyone can partake in.
Right. We had actually a very good example of that in Adventeria with Doothmere. Doothmere, his character lost his forearm down in what was a near-death experience, which is a very mental and physical change of character. Because not only is he now dealing with the fact that he has
just a nub,
just one in a nub, dude.
Yeah.
So that's going to change his daily life a lot, as well as dealing with just the mental downside of you have less,
right?
And that should change your character a lot. And initially, when that had happened to him, he was very upset. He was like, "Oh, this sucks! Like my guy sucks now." And I'm like, "I'm jealous." He's like, "What?" And I'm like, your character is 200% more interesting than anyone else's now.
Yeah.
Because you have this fault and you have something that people are going to remember you by. You're going to stick out now. And you have something interesting that you have to work around, not only as an individual, but as a character.
Right.
And then he thought about it and he's like, damn, you're right. And then he got excited about it. He's like, I'm going to have attachments. Like, I'm going to start, once he starts building his confidence up, he's going to start doing things with his nub at this point that he otherwise wouldn't have gone for as a character, and that actually might make him, after he has that confidence, he may end up in turn be more confident than he was before when he was more abled.
Right.
And that happens as a normal progression of people who go through these kind of experiences. That can happen.
It does.
So that to me that just made him 100 times more interesting because of that.
And for DMs out there that want to create character development in their games, there's a few ways to do it to help your players with character development. One, have extremely developed NPCs ready to go.
Yes.
Having extremely well-developed NPCs bring out so many different layers. And what I like to do is I call it getting to the pudding. And it's basically... for example, an NPC you guys have met, Onder, he has this layer that you guys have seen. And as time's gone on, you've peeled back to the second layer. But there's so much depth left.
Right.
And he's one of 30 NPCs that all have that depth. And it takes a little bit of time. But if you create depth, then you create a role-playing experience right there for your characters. Second thing is leave role-playing open to your characters. When it's time for the characters to do a watch, or there's two characters in a pub or something, take a step back and just stare them down and let them know, hey, role play this scene out. What are you guys doing this scene?
And we've gotten better at that. Initially, we used to just look you like wide-eyed puppies when you do that because we just didn't know, especially being new DM players or new D&D players, I had no idea what to do or what to say in most scenarios. But it did help us grow as players when you did that. And it builds up confidence rapidly.
It's essentially a giant game of improv.
Yeah.
And for people who have never once ever done improv or drama or anything else, when they get put on the spot, it's disguised as Dungeons and Dragons, but it's improv.
It's 100%.
Yeah. And so that builds confidence. It takes time. There's a reason improv classes are so popular because people enjoy that experience. but it's not an experience everyone just jumps in right away. It takes time.
Right, and it's funny because Dungeons and Dragons also generally takes people that wouldn't put themselves into an improv class.
Correct.
They wouldn't have, because it doesn't interest them. I think that's, they might be like, it's not my thing. That's not really for me. But then you take something that's like Dungeons and Dragons, and you're like, oh, you can make this really badass character, and they can have weapons, and you can defeat monsters and stuff. Then you kind of like, okay, you got me now. And then they start doing it, and they don't realize, they're doing 100% just doing improv, but
Right.
it's under the veil of Dungeons and Dragons. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, then they're basically actors at that point. I mean, a skilled improvisational person is an actor in most cases. If you can improv quite well, generally you can act quite well, because that's why it's such a training method for actors.
Right. It is. It's development, and it makes for great stories because everything is so raw, and there's no way to tell what's coming next. The third and final way to, for a DM to create development is keep things hyper realistic in your world.
Yeah.
Not hyper realistic as in, you got to remember, you're in a fantasy setting. There's monsters, dragons, mermaids, giants.
Yeah.
There's nothing hyper realistic about that. But the characters and how they respond to what's going on has to be hyper realistic. If there's an issue, it's not going to go unnoticed or it's not like walking around and playing Skyrim, for example, and the guard's like, what's that? Who's there?
Right.
And you're stealing things behind them.
Right.
Or whatever it may be. They're getting hit with arrows and they're like, God save the king.
Yeah, like in old Grand Theft Auto when the coding wasn't that great, and you just like plow through a crowd of people, and people just be like just strolling down the street, like, that's normal. They
Right.
They didn't really care because their game, and they didn't, the coding wasn't great, and that's not realistic. You just car just went through a crowd of people. You didn't just chill and walk your dog down the street past it. Like, that's fine.
You gotta spend more time in San Fran, man. No, that's part of it. It's just as a DM, it's really easy to fall into that. Like, oh, this character's went and did that. Last thing I wanted to happen was the characters leave the starting zone, but at the same time, it's you have to keep the integrity of your story and what you are doing. And as soon as you start flipping on characters, what happens to the players when they see NPCs flip-flop their personalities and their character traits is it sets a standard. Oh, okay, I'm going to start flip-flopping my character traits for my player character.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a dangerous rabbit hole to continue down.
Yep.
Because then it's just like, well, there's no boundaries or guidelines for anything, because you've broken that wall, essentially.
Yeah, it's that dude in the Little Caesars commercial ripping off his shirt where it's like, there's no rules. Like, put your shirt back on. There's one rule.
This is not one rule.
Just one. There's one left. So development, which we've hit on a lot. And I don't know that there's too much more to touch on other than the more you play, the more characters you create, the longer you do this, the better you get. I worked with a guy that had a folder on his computer. He's like, check this out. I'm like, no, I don't want to see what's on your phone on your computer. He's like, no. Trust me.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's D&D.
Yeah.
I was like,
okay, good context.
Still a 50-50 chance it's going to be weird. But I was like, all right. So he clicks on this folder. And he's got all these names in subfolders. I was like, all right, what are those? He goes, this is characters with art I found that I liked for these different characters with all of these stat sheets, all of these character sheets. I said, you have over 1,000 files in this folder. So yeah, I have over 1,000 character ideas. Like, why? It's like, it's just my hobby. I like to develop characters. It's like, do you write? No, that's what he does. He just develops characters. And they were, him and his wife, and they'd wanted to do a D&D group. And at the time, I just didn't have any time. So I couldn't DM for him. But I knew, and I still know to this day, DMing for him would probably be a blast. Because with that much character development, he's probably pretty damn good at it.
Yeah. I mean, he's put in the old saying, like, you put in your 10,000 hours for something. That's how you become a professional or a master at your craft. Just put in 10,000 hours. I'd say about 1,000 characters is probably about that line somewhere in there.
Man, I hope so. I don't know.
I would like to think
That's my goal to DM, man. 10,000 hours. I got to be getting close.
That's good.
I got to be getting close. I think 20,000. I might be like a mini Matt Mercer.
20,000 is god tier.
Yeah.
Like you're god tier at 20,000. 20,000 hours is a lot of time.
It's crazy. There's like 4 DMs right now in the world that I think are just master tier.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Matt Mercer is the most commonly known.
Mm-hmm.
Brennan from Dimension 20 is another huge, widely known dungeon master.
Mm-hmm.
But those guys are so good at what they do. And it doesn't surprise me at all that they went on to be voice actors and directors or writers. I don't think Matt Mercer's a writer or director per se, other than what he writes for D&D. But Liam O'Brien, who's on that show, is a director.
Mm-hmm.
The creativity out of these minds, and it started with them sitting down and playing Dungeons and Dragons when they were kids.
It's bonkers, right?
Crazy. Absolutely insane.
I mean, if you do look at it, though, anything that people can become professionals in the arts, I say the arts specifically because I was going to say a lot of these things start with something they did when they were very young, and then it built up those skills over time that then translated to a job.
Right.
Or what could be a job. I say in the arts because you can't just like be like, I'm gonna play doctor when I'm 7, and then you're like, oh no, I'm a doctor.
Right.
But if like when it comes to art stuff, like if you can draw, they don't care if you went to school to draw. If you can draw, like if you can draw and you do amazing pieces, they're gonna look at your work and be like, wow, we need you working on our game or our show or whatever.
The arts are cool because there's no talking about arts and being good at arts.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
Right.
To be good at art, you have to have art, whether it's
do.
music, whether it's drawing,
Yeah.
writing, and D&D. Side note, the Joe Rogan podcast and what he talks about comedians. One of my favorite topics on his podcast is when he talks about the craft and how much time and effort they put into their craft and their sets.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's like, man, I can relate into what I do with D&D
Mm-hmm.
because I've watched plenty of other campaigns sitting across at tables, and you can tell when someone is flying by the seat of their pants,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell when someone's put in a little bit work but not quite,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can tell when someone's put in a ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people I'm like, hey, at the end of this, stick around. I want to have a conversation about you.
Right.
Like, what tips do you do? Like, what tools do you use? I mean, what sort of things are you reading? What material are you building?
Mm-hmm.
And where do you build those sources from? And here's where I build mine from.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates that awesome sort of
Collaboration.
Dave and I have done that quite a bit. Dave's been DMing since before I was born,
Mm-hmm.
for one, which is crazy. But he's someone who he's getting back into it, granted because of our play group, but back in the day, this is a guy that crafted and worked his behind off
Mm-hmm.
to build this. And you can relate to that. I can relate to those hours sitting at home writing
Mm-hmm.
or coming down here. And even though it was only 3 hours,
Mm-hmm.
it's still 3 hours of work that I took home, and then you're refining, and then you're refining again.
I thought it was cool to see that process too, because I didn't. Again, I'm new to D&D, so I'm new to all aspects to it, especially the DM side, because I've had some time now to see and have experience in the player side of things. But as a new player, you don't really know what work goes on the DM side of things. For all we know, you're just spitting it as you go, and you're just on fire. And when you come in the knowledge, you have no way to know otherwise. But it was cool seeing you kind of even just like, I didn't see the details. I just saw like you jotting certain things down and writing things up, and part of that process was very interesting. And I think, like with developing substance, your character developing substance to your environment, those two things come together is what makes an interesting campaign as a whole.
Yeah.
Versus just like, cut and dry. You're at a place, let's leave. There's a cave, attack. Big guy attack. Big guy spell. Big guy other attack. One guy heal. Gold. Back to town.
All right, yeah. Which some games, some people prefer games like that.
That's fun.
Some people want Diablo on tabletop.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's okay. For me, I try to hit the 5 senses in each setting. Smell, sound,
Speaking of which, you messed Trevor up.
Yeah.
Trevor,
He's having too
severe
much of that one.
arachnophobia, and we're fighting a spider. He describes it so well. Trevor has to give up. Arvos has to get up and leave because he's going to throw up. Because he was so uncomfortable visualizing the spider that was around us, and when he like got cut open and had like the baby gut spilling out, he was just like, and it just, I loved it. I thought it was so great because he was so there, and that was one thing that we liked so much about Trevor in the first place. When he saw our first like interaction with D&D, he was so into it. Like when he wasn't playing and we were just, interacting in our very first characters ever, he was sitting in the back like he was sweating. He was sweating visibly and he was like just sitting there just shocked when certain things were happening just because he was so there. And I think that right there is the essence of why people play. And that's the magic to it.
Yeah, when you can vest into it, it's so cool. Mm-hmm. And he does a really good job of it.
He does.
He is actually great at picking himself up out of this world and putting himself right there in the thick of things. And I might have to revisit that. He doesn't even realize he just created a whole new subplot for his character based off his reactions. I have some great things to work on.
So great.
Another thing that's sort of interesting is we have a very talented cast of people sitting at our table. Mm-hmm. And even though not every single one of us is a voice actor, and we don't have perhaps the posture or renown that Dimension 20 and Critical Role has, we still have phenomenal development at the table. We have a comic book writer. We have just phenomenal experience in different avenues through animation. And people have seen a lot on the side of arts and craft and how long it takes to put in that work. As a DM, if you can allow your pride to take a seat and allow those people to help collaborate things. Garrett's approached me about he wants to run a little side quest.
Yeah, which is cool.
And I'm like, yeah, man, let's do it. And what I would really like to do is take a step back, create an NPC for that side quest, and put him in the DM chair for an episode and let him get that, maybe a side episode off the main series and let him get that experience as a DM. And then slowly you see the progression. What's really, really fun is being a player, DMing, and going back and being a player.
Right.
And just
feels refreshing, I'd imagine.
It is. And when you sit down and you start playing, you just notice things that you had never done before that are way high in development and content. And at the end of the day, we do this for the content, the social interaction, and then the content we get out of it. So it's been great.
Right. So to summarize, again, this episode has been completely about character development and what comes with the rewards that you can heap from the character development. But starting off, obviously, your character sheet, assigning your class, and once you have done that, understanding what it means to choose the class that you've chosen, and aligning your character in line with that, and then asking yourself some questions about your character, asking some questions that your character can answer. Basic stuff, like we talked about. What side of the bed do they sleep on? Do they have parents? Where do they come? Where do they grow up? What do they do for a living before this time? Ask your character some basic questions. Ask yourself as a person, what is your goal for this campaign? Ask what is your character's goal for this campaign? And I think those are two very distinct key points that are quite interesting. That again, especially the personal one, I didn't think about that at all. I only thought character based, and I think adding that element of what you want personally out of the campaign is huge.
Right.
And I can't believe it was something that I'd missed. And then beyond that, really dive into those details and what makes your character. And then once you have that kind of fleshed out and you're ready to play, be true to your character. Remember your alignments. Remember, those details that you outlined, and just have them bump against others that have done the same. And that's what creates that magic, that interaction and relationships and just the overall D&D experience.
Right. The full development. If you want to change the alignment path of your character, there's a way to do it that's still very organic. And sometimes you'll see with people, they're like, man, I feel like my character's stuck to this. I'd like to see him change. Write it. Make it happen.
Yeah, give it a reason.
Have something to affect that change and development. So when people, I don't want players to feel pigeonholed into what they do.
Yeah.
Just know that it's a character's a living, breathing idea. Every time you sit down at the table and you play as your character, it's going to take work. Sometimes it's going to give you headaches.
You're sculpting.
Yeah, because you're constantly building. And a lot of the times, if you're having so much fun, you don't even realize that the development's happening and that things are changing within your character, because you're sucked into this world where you're like, I'm here with the boys or girls, we're playing D&D, it's a blast. And yeah, it's nice to just take a moment at the end of each episode and just reflect on what happened in that episode and kind of bring out that, I never even realized I did that. That's awesome. And people build more confidence and just creates. Again, one last comparison to Critical Role. What that group does is a culmination of years and years and years of experience.
Yes.
And the amount of Matt Mercer puts in each week, I would be willing to guess is close to 40 hours of work a week for his campaign, because it is his, that's his full-time gig. They're voice actors, but he is so integrated in D&D, and he has so many. He's got celebrity D&D. He has, he's been on Dimension 20. He has different things that he does in the D&D world, but he's probably putting up to 40 hours a week in design and craft.
I can see that. Like, for as fleshed out as it is, and even as experienced as it is, you still got to put in that time to get where
you do
what their output is on a weekly
basis. And their game pace is so quick because everyone is kind of,
it's so fluid.
It is. It's incredibly fluid.
They're so fluid. None of them talk over each other. They all bounce off of each other's characters very well. Right. The characters that know that they have more reserved character, they can still have so much expression and so much influence in the story with saying so very little. Not just because they're taking a step back and just watching, but because they know their character doesn't inject that much. But when they do inject, like, the whole room stops, because that's the atmosphere they've created for their character.
Their atmosphere is huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. That particular atmosphere is something that, man, just the way they have their studio set up, the music, the playlists, the way he flips through it, which is something I need to get back to, and getting those playlists. It's so hard to find any sort of musical
thing that you can use that isn't stepped on by copyright in one way or another.
Right. And then where there's not going to be a million ads, and
yep.
that, that makes it difficult because we are streaming ours. And then again, just when there's a sad scene on that show, everyone's sad.
Yeah, it hits everybody.
You can feel it. And so, but we had a scene this last episode, the dancing scene, and I genuinely thought the atmosphere and the feel of the table was very upbeat, very enthralled in what was happening each round, and sort of that excitement. It's a bummer we didn't get to finish it.
What's funny is, though, I did actually thoroughly enjoy the high contrast. It felt like a scene in a movie.
Yeah.
Because when does something bad happen? Always during the most enjoyable, exciting part of whatever it is.
It's very true.
And it was so happy and joyful, and you kind of like see where these things are going. You see, this guy's going to get first. This guy. You're totally distracted from the negative that could be. And then all of a sudden, boom, the whole floor stops, and it goes hard negative. And it's just a complete 180, high contrast, high stress scenario. At least I was sitting there stressed out. Like, I had a hard time thinking about what I was going to do as my character, because I was literally just stressed out watching what was unfolding. And I think that's truly what my character would have been doing.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't involved in the scene as it was. I was off to the side. And I think that that's very much so what my character would have been doing, because I was my character. At that point, and we were like an hour in to almost 2 hours in, I was very much so into being my character at that point. I was very in the moment. And so being in the moment, that did stress me out. I was like, wow. And then after the fact, I realized how like paralyzed I was in that moment because of how things were escalating and what was happening. and just the sheer contrast of, our friends are gonna win first place. Oh, I wonder what this happens if he gets first, and like blah blah blah, and like how's the night gonna go down, and then just everything switching over, and it was extremely interesting.
It was.
It's gonna go down, I think, as one of our most, at least so far, controversial but most interesting episodes today.
Yeah, that's true. It will be highly controversial because
it changed so much.
A lot of people viewing are going to be like, how on earth are they going to salvage that? Because there's so many plot holes left open.
There's
and
so many open ends.
Your DM worked tirelessly all week to make sure those loopholes
We're so excited though. Like,
we'll be close.
A lot of us are speculating what could happen, but there's only so much speculation you can do when you don't know the framework in which you're going to work in. It's not like you can like.
Let me put this on the record.
Okay.
They have no idea what's going to happen on Friday. So tune in Friday 10 p.m. to
so
Twitch
excited.
stream because it'll be good.
Yeah.
I'm excited for it. But you guys have to take the bait. See, that's the thing. Like, there's
okay. So that's
different plot holes.
That should be another episode too. Like
DM hooks.
DM hooks. Read into them.
Yeah.
There's certain things that are happening for a reason, and sometimes the obvious choice is the right choice.
I probably have, in almost every setting and scene, I probably have anywhere from 1 to 2 Easter eggs and about 3 or 4 other hidden subplots that could be experienced. Probably in pretty much every single scene.
Right.
And what it comes from as a player is getting better at, well, what do I see around me? Is there anything in peculiar about that? And this sort of the questioning and digging those things out.
Mm-hmm.
For one, it's the world we live in, right? If you go and you sit down in a storefront, in a shop, and you look at the people interacting, say you're getting sushi, every single thing around you has some sort of story. Doesn't mean it's all interesting, but it has a story. Every person in that shop has some sort of backstory or has some sort of conflict going on in their life. Doesn't mean it's interesting, but it's there. And so the dynamic in D&D as a DM is if you can craft those and put those plots there, and then you have the big hooks, which are pretty obvious. You have some you have more subtle hooks too. Right now, all of our hooks are pretty obvious because we miss a lot of them, but we're getting better at it. Much better from where we started.
I think that as players, we should also get better at helping others who are not getting the hook. You know what I mean? Like, when you go to do this one thing or this other thing, there's this one really obvious choice, and they're like, the other one. I think as players, we could help interject like, oh, and then I reach in and grab and do the obvious thing.
Right.
For when people aren't seeing the 2 or 3 hooks in a row that are trying to bounce things in a certain direction or keep things in line.
Right.
Because, I mean, there is character development. There is characters making choices based off of what their character would do. And sometimes that isn't the hook, and maybe that that choice is organic to their character. But sometimes, we have choices that are interjected by other people all the time. You're making this choice and someone smacks your hand and they grab it first. That is something that happens in real life. And I think that also as players, you can look at some certain hooks or, maybe your character, you as a person and you as a character might be interested on the DM hook. So you're like, okay, I'll reach in and grab that thing before the other person does. Yeah. Because you want to see it go this way because you're interested.
We just hit an important point that I do want to mention on.
Okay.
That is, for every person creating a character in D&D, there's one thing I truly believe every character should have as a trait. That is curiosity.
Yes.
Because curiosity will keep the game moving constantly if you allow your character to be curious. About everything.
And that was a skill I did not have going into at least our very first campaign. When you would be like, yeah, this is a room, it's dark, low lit, torches line each side of the wall. There's some vases on the back of the wall, some broken, some busted, some full with mysterious liquids. You have some, some candles. Some have had many hours burned into them. Some are fresh. You have a dinner table over to the left with one plate looks like food was eaten on, blah, blah, blah. Like, all these details mattered. But as a person who was new into D&D, I was like, cool, this room's dope. Like I was just like, cool, these are things.
It's a dope room.
And yeah, this is a dope room. I could picture this room. And then I was like, okay, where's the bad guy? And I didn't think like, oh yeah, go and investigate those vases of mysterious liquids. Because it was said for a reason. Not only just painting the picture of the room, but your character should genuinely be like, not just be like, yep, I'm in a place, cool. All right, where's the bad guy? Like they should be like, you would be curious. You would be curious about the things that are in the room. You would want to experience and look and touch and feel and
Absolutely.
Wow, this is different. This is weird. Like those are things that you would do as a normal person. You don't just take in. You got to remember. I think that comes with experience. That you're not viewing this. You are playing. You're not viewing it. You're not watching it as a movie in your brain. You are playing it.
No, you are very much on stage an actor within the show.
Yeah.
Within this production.
With no script. So you're
Correct.
You're the one making those choices.
And it all comes back to what do you want as a player out of a campaign.
Right.
And that's when you have a conversation with your DM. And for me, it would be, hey, this play group is, we're about 60-40. We're 60% roleplay centric. We're 40% get in there, beat something with a stick, get the loot, get out. And I have a campaign that's a 70-30 on this night. Maybe you'd be best suited for that if you're into roleplay. Or if you're really not into roleplay, you're all about that loot, that dungeon crawl, that your character's badass fight, kill this monster, bang, bang, doom. That's fine. You know, we have a group that's about 80% go in, slay, 20% roleplay. I think you'd be best suited for that group. And don't sit down a group of people that have different ideas of how they want the game to be played. Or if they do, make sure everyone agrees upon it. Our group, everyone knows each other. They're good friends. And last week we touched on that, is if the best way to get a group is getting a group of close people that you know together. But some people don't have that luxury. Some people are a little more introverted and they want to get involved, and they're using Facebook groups, or they're using Discord or online applications. And I've seen so many of those fizzle out because
it's so easy not to show up for Discord chat.
It is. Billy, Joe, and Susan were having a blast, but Timmy couldn't stand the campaign.
So he just leaves.
Timmy, what's going on? And he tells you 2 months later, well, you know, I was looking for more role play, and there was no role play. And then, you know, someone said something off color on top of that, and I was
like, whatever.
Yeah, I got nothing to do in that. It's like, well, as a DM, it's kind of your responsibility.
You got to get a feel for the room.
You do.
You have you get a finger on the pulse.
Yeah. But characters and players have to be honest about what they want too. So it's a give or take. It's structure to it. And D&D is not nearly as complicated as we talk about it in depth. It's a very simple game. We approach it at a very analytical and a very different sort of mind state. We talk about it, and we like getting into this depth because our viewers enjoy this depth, because there's people who've played that when you see D&D, you see the top of the iceberg, right? And then once you dive below the surface, it just keeps going and going and going.
Right. Well,
I think
that about wraps up episode 2 of Apes Dungeon. Or is it Dungeon Apes?
Dungeon Apes. We're Dungeon Apes, yeah.
We're still so fresh. I'm still getting used to the swing of things.
I feel ya. I know. Man, 2 episodes in. That's cool. I think next episode maybe we'll do some world building. We'll do
world building would be cool.
Yeah, we might do like more D&D as a whole, characters or player base. D&D as a whole, characters, player base. So we might do like next one's world building. Then we'll go into another episode of DMing. We'll go to another episode of I don't know, something along of maybe throwing in monsters. I feel like an episode on monsters would be fun too.
Monsters would be a lot of fun. Yeah, because we've only experienced so many, and those definitely are very interesting and a lot of fun. So
or leave a comment on YouTube and let us know what you want, or message us on our Facebook and ask us what you guys would like to hear about.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see you on the next episode.